to mute myself.
Good to be here. JP asked me if I want to do some on the Cedar Mountain for this series of lectures. I said great, because I've been talking to Rodolfo Coria about going down to Argentina and being a keynote for an early Cretaceous symposium. And unfortunately, the pandemic happened, so I didn't get to go to Argentina. So I've tweaked this talk up a little bit, a little more recent stuff, and gives me a chance to use it because I put some energy into it. Anyway, I hope you like it. If not, just shut your eyes and lay back and let my melodious voice put you to sleep. Anyway, okay, now work. It's going slow. Okay, something, growing up, I'm an old guy, so for me, it was basically to look at the Jurassic dinosaurs in the Time Life magazine, flip a page, and then you saw the Lance Formation, the latest Cretaceous. Though, of course, we've also have a good handle on the Judith River. But overall, there's this huge gap of 75 million years between these faunas, with a little bit known from the Arundel in the early Cretaceous. And in the 60s, John Ostrom really put forward, John Ostrom really did put forward the cloverleaf fauna to give us a little peek at the middle of this. Hopefully you're not seeing that upper bar. Anyway, this big gap we have kind of filled here in Utah. Basically, I like to, UFOP is Utah Friends of Paleontology, which was formed by Dave Gillette before I got here. But about the time he was forming UFOP was the time I discovered Utahraptor, and it was officially named in 1993. So basically it was named when the movie was released by coincidence. And I actually discovered it in 1990 when the book was released. So it has strong ties to Jurassic Park without any question. But as you can see, we only knew a few animals in Utah that had names on them. There were a lot of teeth known until, after Utahraptor, everybody realized, hey, that's an interesting fishing hole. So there's a lot of organizations working in Utah. I'm not doing all this by myself, but because of the mobs of people, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Denver, LA County, museum after museum's coming in here to work, Burpee Museum, we've really started building this fauna up. And now we have over 100 new dinosaurs, because we're well over 115 at this point. Dinosaurs in at least 27 sequential fauna levels. However, the Denver Museum wants to divide the Campanian into 6 or 7 discrete faunas. I've only got it split into 2. So I need a bigger chart without any question. But one of the things I want to point out is when you look at this chart, look at the history of dinosaurs, the Cedar Mountain Formation, given age, when you look at the dates we have at the bottom and top, is actually about 1/3 of our dinosaur record in Utah. And generally, the rocks are only about 500 feet thick. Fortunately, they're richly fossiliferous, and we have some really nice marker beds that let us separate these faunas out. It's taken us a while to learn this stuff. When we look at all of this material, basically it comes from eastern Utah, east central Utah. It doesn't go all the way to the Four Corners, but basically the Arches National Park area and around the San Rafael Swell is where the vast bulk of these Cedar Mountain dinosaurs have been found. Now, of course, Utah's famous for its Upper Jurassic dinosaurs in the Morrison. This is the Molly's Hogans to the east of Arches. We have some pretty decent outcrops in the Morrison in Utah. And here's Mymore Pelta. I did get to name one Morrison dinosaur, so I didn't leave it untouched. But of course, we're famous for Dinosaur National Monument. There was one of my guys, Scott Madsen, who I've worked with for 35 years. My predecessor, Jim Madsen, first state paleontologist, and really the first working dinosaur paleontologist I ever met back in 73, 74, when I started working in the San Juan Basin as an undergraduate down in New Mexico. And the biggest Morrison site, the Hanksville Burpee Quarry, may well be the biggest single dinosaur bone bed anywhere in the country, certainly the biggest one in Utah. It stretches for a kilometer and is as rich as Dinosaur National Monument for that distance, over about a football field width. So it's a big river complex. Fortunately, the skeletons are mostly right at the top of the channels that aren't hugely hard to work. Now, when we look at the Cedar Mountain, as I've said, we've really put together a good story. But when, the first named Cedar Mountain dinosaur was Iguanodon Tracks in 1977, which was a little jaw fragment with 2 teeth in it. The second dinosaur named in the Cedar Mountain Formation total was Utahraptor Ostermazei in 1993. So now, we look at what's happened, 28 years later, and we've got a real nice history with some very major events in the history of North America, pretty well defined. The outcrop belt, as I said, we have hundreds of localities. These are just major localities. The black arrow is where the type section of the Cedar Mountain occurs, near Buckhorn Reservoir. The colored arrows are where the major member type sections are. So we've got the Poison Strip, the Yellow Cat, Ruby Ranch, and here's the Mustn't Touch It, kind of the dominant colors for each one. But this entire outcrop belt is hugely fossiliferous. But it's a complex unit, as you'll see. University of Utah's William Lee Stokes first named it in 1944 as the Cedar Mountain Shale, with the underlying Buckhorn Conglomerate as a separate formation below it. And these were the first time they really separated the Morrison Formation from the overlying Upper Cretaceous. Used to be called the Dakota Formation. Now we're calling it the Natarita. So remember that is going on all the new geologic maps. He applied the pediment concept to the fluvial Buckhorn Conglomerate, kind of like he did with the Shinarump at the base of the Chinle Formation. I tend to look at it more as a regolith, just the weathered surface sitting on a major unconformity. But in 52, he basically realized the Buckhorn Conglomerate was a river system and was discontinuous. So he included it as a member of the Lower Cretaceous Cedar Mountain Formation. And he really distinguished these rocks, which are similar but a bit more drab, from the underlying Morrison Formation by an abundance of gastroliths and carbonate nodules. I mean, carbonate nodules are so abundant in some areas that you can't even see the ground for crumbled carbonate. And then also a lack of dinosaur bones. And that kept the riffraff out of my hair until I was old enough to go out there and do something serious. Bob Young, Grand Junction, Colorado geologist, did a fantastic paper, Dakota Group on the Colorado Plateau, where he included the Cedar Mountain and his Natarita Formation as a Dakota group, and looked at them as being 5 sequences separated by regional sandstones. And when you look at his work and go out to visit his sections, they're actually pretty accurate. In fact, when you look at it, he defines what I would consider the outcrop belt of the Yellow Cat member, but he only recognized what we now refer to as the Upper Yellow Cat member. Now, this is a cross section with high vertical exaggeration of these rocks. It sits unconformably above the Morrison Formation, which the top of which on the Colorado Plateau has been well dated at about 150 million years. So we're missing most of the Tithonian, the uppermost stage of the Morrison. And it sits under the Tanunk Shale, the Mancos, And here we show you the Natarita interfingering with the muslin-touching member. But these various members that we define in separate colors all preserve dinosaurs. And the numbers 1 through 6 account for the major dinosaur faunas. And I'm expecting eventually people will subdivide this even further. But I'm not going to try to do it, and let the next generation deal with that. But even that basal unit, the Buckhorn Conglomerate, which is a cobble conglomerate, I mean, the average grain size of the pebbles is as big as your fist. It's a real coarse unit, not the kind of thing you'd expect a dinosaur in. There'd been debate by sedimentologists whether this was Jurassic, because there's places where this isn't cemented. And this has caused some turmoil because they say, oh, see, it pinches out into the Morrison, thinking the muddy part of the Cedar Mountain was part of the Morrison. So it was included by a number of researchers as part of the Morrison Formation. However, in here, we have an upside down in a big overhang, literally a cave, an upside down ankylosaur. Here are armor plates. Here's vertebrae. These are caudal vertebrae. Here's the dorsal vertebra and ribs and part of the pelvis laying on his back. We got to make a peel of this thing and get it curated in a museum before someone trashes it. But it's an articulated upside down ankylosaur. Pretty neat. But look at the ages. We've got new dating that puts the lower part of the Cedar Mountain Formation much older than we had previously thought. In fact, we probably in the Cedar Mountain Formation record virtually the entire early Cretaceous from its beginnings. So I'm guesstimating the Buckhorn is probably upper Berriasian, which is the lowest stage of the early Cretaceous, to lower Valanginian, which is the second stage up. That's just kind of a guess. But the pebbles we see in the lower yellowcat suggest there's somewhat of a correlation. And we have numbers from detrital zircons from paleosols, and they give you better dates and sandstones that range from 142 at the base to about 135 toward the top. So yeah, it's a reasonable guess. Now the lower yellowcat member, Fauna 1, it's hard to call the Buckhorn one animal fauna, but down south of Green River, Utah, if we start looking at those rocks, we realize there's two parts. This sand right there, can you see my pointer? Hopefully you can. It's the poison strip member. Fauna 3 is preserved in it where it exists.
Yeah, we can see it, Jim.
Okay, great, thanks. And we have a lower part here, 1, and then an upper yellowcat 2. And this little hard layer there we call the cap rock that runs along on top of that. Below here, this is the Crystal Geyser Quarry, where we've pulled out thousands and thousands of bones of Falcarius. And half a kilometer south of here, we have a site that's actually in the cap rock with Therizinosaur, another Therizinosaur bone bed, but it's bigger Therizinosaur, and it's got a giant ankylosaur in it, which is exciting. This is Don's Ridge area. Here's Don with the Brachiosaurus, the limb bone. The lowermost unit here, right on the contact, has cobble-sized rocks, actually football-sized quartzites and things in it, with sauropod bones. And obviously, they broke a lot of the bones up. I mean, we're talking football-sized cobbles that must have come out of the Buckhorn River system further to the west. There's the cap rock right there going across. So this is 1, the lower yellowcat, and there's 2 with the poison strip up above it. The Falcarius was a great discovery because it's the most basal Therizinosaur and probably the oldest one in the world with our new dates. This age is pretty far off now. Just trying to update these things. We've recently published this stuff. In Don's Ridge, we've got the holotype of Iguana Colossus. It's a big iguanodont. The ilium is, I don't know, 2.5 to 3 feet long. It's quite a sizable animal. Got a fair bit of skull material and the vertebral column, and of course part of the pelvis. That upturned pubis seems to be pretty diagnostic for it, or at least it and its close relatives. In that site, we've also got, actually this is from what we call the Suarez site by Selena Marina Suarez. This is a Truadant Maxilla, very inflated, very pneumatic. Teeth are all missing, but it's got characters that allow it to be identified as a Truadant. I'm not getting a lot of arguments on that, which is good. Here's that elephant-sized Ankylosaur from the Suarez site. I just spent last week in Price, Utah, studying this specimen because I turned that site over to the Prehistoric Museum in Price because we just had too many sites to deal with. Here's one of the limb bones from that bone bed sauropods, and it's either a Brachiosaurid or a Turiasaur, and it may well be another Turiasaur, which I'll talk about a little bit. Now, if we go 30 miles east, and that's a little over 30 miles due east, we come to Doling's Bowl. And this site really confused me for a long time. I found it in 1990 when I first found the sites around the Gaston Quarry. But all I had found at that time were teeth, Ankylosaur ossicles, you can see up here, big sauropod teeth, big carnosaur teeth. We've dug these things up over 3 inches long. I mean, this is a acro-sized Carcharodontosaur kind of beast. But all we have is the teeth, so we can't tell you much. Big croc teeth and a little ankylosaur tooth. This is an associated skeleton of the holotype of Yurgowuchia dolingi, which is a little dromaeosaur that we think is close to Utahraptor. Now, that site was problematic because we had a student from India working with us from, I think it was from Trinity College, and this kid was working on these paleosols a little bit and silcretes in the area. And, I'd come over and work with him and look at this site. Then I'd go back over there looking for teeth and things. And I realized, hey, those fossils are found way down low here. They're not from, this calcrete we used to think was the base of the Cedar Mountain. You see Kirkland and others, 1997. Aubrey put it at the bottom of the calcrete. I figured the paleosol was built into the top of the Morrison, so I put it at the top. I now include it in the lower yellow cat. I still think it's related to the underlying stack of paleosols that characterize the lower yellow cat. But here's the Ned Colbertia site, a little saurosaur that we now realize is one of the oldest ornithomimids in the world. And we're hoping to do a lot more with it. There's actually a skeleton of this excavated by BYU that's going to get mounted by Rob Gaston. And he's just waiting until they describe it. So it may be a wait. Anyway, here's the same area, a little bit closer to the road. You can see rock hounds are collecting the silcrete. The silcretes have been reported as petrified wood by rock hounds for years, and all kinds of names, bacon agate, just all kinds of things, because it's a bed of finely layered agates, what it looks like. What it is, and we figured out, this is silicified peat. So instead of going to coal, it's a very alkaline environment sitting on all the volcanic ash of the Morrison. It's been replaced by silica. Since it's pure plant material, it got replaced like petrified wood gets replaced. So it's purely silicified, and you can, in some of the good stuff, you can see roots in it and fabric, but often it is obliterated by the silicification process. But we have some pretty good stuff that shows micro fabrics in it that are pretty interesting. And we're still trying to get a student to work with Marina Suarez at Kansas on that because she's interested in it. Here's the upper yellow cat. Gastonia Quarry is just on the other side of this ridge at about that level there in the upper yellow cat. There's the poison strip, sand complex right there. It can be 1, or it could actually be 0 to 5 sands. It's not just one bench. So often there's one big sand that holds it up as a big cliff forming unit. Now, thinking about the soils is real important in here because the contact is full of ironstone nodules and root casts, as well as the cherts that we see. And that suggests a fairly wet environment. There's no carbonate at all in this stuff. And you go down in the Morrison, which doesn't really have great paleosols. The best we usually can do with the Morrison is incipient paleosols. But you go up above in the Cedar Mountain, we get tons of carbonate nodules from arid, and carbonate's a salt. So with less than 18 to 20 inches of rain a year, if it's seasonal, even less, if it's not seasonal, you get carbonate salts formed in the soil. If you guys are all comfortable with all the alkali that comes up in the spring in the West, basically that's this kind of process going on. We're dry. You don't see carbonate east of the Mississippi, and you don't see water and ironstone very much in the west of the Mississippi. Now, looking at the base of it, the lower yellow cat, going from that Doling's Bowl, this is when I was driving back and forth. It's only 2.3 miles, probably 5.5 driving the way the roads are. But back and forth, because we had found with the teeth, we'd found some bones, and not a lot, but we found a couple bones. And I realized, they were Cretaceous, getting Ankylosaur and Iguanodon teeth and things, and realized it's below the calcrete, the marker bed that everyone had been using for the contact. So once I convinced myself and I realized it occurs right on the silcrete, we have the silcrete here as well, we had to redefine the lower contact, and we base it where we start finding pebbles in the paleosols. So we get ironstone, iron replaced roots. Not as rich as you see in the Hell Creek for iron rich stuff, but certainly much wetter environment than we typically see. But the thing is a stack of paleosols. And even though we call this lower yellow cat, I sometimes look at this and say, okay, that's the upper Tithonian. That's probably the end of the Jurassic. There's the basal part of the Berriasian. There's the beginning of the Valanginian, because each one of these paleosols is probably separated by, represents a fair bit of time with an unconformity between each one. So how much time is there is a project that's going to take some time. But the Green River stuff and the Doling's Bowl stuff may well not be the same age within this time interval that this represents. So basically from this, we got a couple things that the contact interval is quite wet compared to the semi-arid Morrison. The top of the Morrison, though, can have ironstone in it too, the very top, only in a couple localities that we've got. But then you hit that calcrete, which is, of course, carbonate, and we start seeing carbonate nodules all through it and don't see any more iron in the rock at all. So we basically look at that unconformity as maybe representing the beginning of the rain shadow from the severe thrust belt. And that's being supported by stable isotope geochemistry work that the Suarez twins have been doing. Selena has been largely working on that part, looking at dinosaur teeth and things. But as you go up to the unconformity under the Natarita, of course, it gets real wet. There's coals in the Natarita. And of course, the seaway is nearby. So we get wet again up there. So this whole Cedar Mountain interval is quite dry. But you see, it only goes up through the Ruby Ranch. It only goes up through Fauna 4. Kind of things we get Doling's Bowl, as I mentioned, Yurgowuchia, Dolingi. There's a nice pelvis, pretty classic Dromaeosaur pelvis vertebra. Here's a Utahraptor caudal vertebra. There's a nice little caudal, pretty classic Dromaeosaur one. This is probably from a juvenile, though. We have bigger stuff. This pelvis is bigger than that vertebral column. There's a Utahraptor dorsal. Do we have Iguana Colossus? We have pubes that show that we got something close. Most of this material are juveniles. So we look at these guys, you can see what we've got here. And we probably have 25, 30 animals represented so far among the iguanodonts, 3 or 4 Ankylosaurs. That's the humerus of Hippodraco that occurs with Utahraptor. And here's this guy that occurs in the underlying lower yellow cat. And it's pretty clear they're different animals. And we do have quite a bit bigger material now that's just being worked on of this CF Iguana Colossus. Got a nice ankylosaur there. I like ankylosaurs. We're working on naming 3 new ones right now. But this guy occurs right above the contact. In some ways, it's more similar to the Jurassic animals than Gastonia, which occurs with Utahraptor and the younger early Cretaceous beasts. But you can see this nice process for the pterygoids, pretty elongate. You know, the Jurassic ones are not nearly elongate. The pelvis, pretty much parallel to the sacrum for the outside of the ilia. They angle out a lot more in Gastonia. Here's Lori McWhinney versus Bird's eye. And the osteoderms are really distinctive. People don't realize this, but you know, they're tougher than dealing with Adasaur osteoderms in the Triassic, but each species is very distinctive. Osteoderms, that's what evolution works on the outside of your body in a lot of ways. Display the pretty hats the ceratopsians wear on the back of their frills. Osteoderms like this, these big plates that occur down the sides of the tail, are very distinctive, and they probably have a degree of sexual selection. The skulls are really conservative. Heads are not nearly as helpful as other parts of the body, but the armor is really distinctive. We got a mired sauropod there that I named Mirasaurus Bob Youngeye with my colleagues in Spain, kind of as a payback for letting me play with the Europelta. You know, it's the earliest nodosaur in Spain, probably the best Ankylosaur ever found in Europe. They've got something like 8 skeletons now. There's a lot more work to be done there. But this guy's mired. This upper surface, bones scattered everywhere. And there's the hind foot going in. Under here is a forefoot sticking down into it. And below here on this surface, you might see a big rib here. We have a pretty big scattered Iguana Colossus skeleton. And the wash goes right through here against the side of the quarry. So you can see we made a big berm to save us from flash floods. But the bone bed goes right under that with the best preserved material in the site is going under the wash. But we're ready to start dealing with that this summer. Now, the Upper Jurassic from Europe includes a group we don't get in the Jurassic in North America, the Turiasaurs. They have longer heads than Camarasaurs, and they're more basal. You know, so these are a more primitive animal, kind of a eusauropod, not a neosauropod. But they have what they call cardiodont teeth. And we do find them in the Cedar Mountain. They're way more hooked than this, but they're much more asymmetrical than the marginal teeth of Camarasaurus. And the anterior teeth look a lot like big brachiosaur teeth, look a lot like that, as you'll see here in a minute. Here's some of the material, the cranial material, some of the pelvic material. I did this in science, or Nature reports. So they only give you so much space to do it. But as you can see, we have a lot of skull material. This is from Turiasaurus itself from Spain. But there's one of our big anterior teeth. And here's some of the lateral, more cardiodont teeth, very similar. But theirs are all Jurassic, ours is Cretaceous. And when we look at the Jurassic Cretaceous boundary and look at our Cedar Mountain things that we've ID'd, the interesting thing is Cedarosaurus, whatchamacallit, I can't even think of it at the moment. I'll get it when I have a picture with its name on it. Mirasaurus, they don't come out of the Jurassic stuff in North America. So here's Brachiosaurus down in here. Basically, they think that our sauropods went extinct with our stegosaurs and are replaced by European taxa hopping over, filling in those voids at the beginning of the Cretaceous. You know, this is something that needs to be followed up on a lot more, but it's it's really exciting relative to paleobiogeography. Now, the overlying material includes a thing called Moabosaurus, described as a Camarasaur. It's also a Turiasaur. It's easily distinguished. There's vertebral features that distinguish it too, but easily distinguished by having forked cervical ribs, as you see here. And they're clearly, we have almost all of them for Mirasaurus, and they are not forked, even though there's a thickening. This suggests that there was a tendon coming off, and in these guys, the tendon ossified and became extended. But they're distinguishable on a number of characters. Fauna 1, Fauna 2. This is the Gaston Quarry here. Rob Gaston discovered this site, climbed up this hill, found bone coming down, followed it up. We approached the site by climbing through this cliff here and going laterally to it. A little easier, but here's a section there: the lower yellow cat fauna 2, poison strip fauna 3, and the Ruby Ranch. And you can looking over the cliff. There's the quarry, right in there. A lot of bones in there. Hundreds and hundreds of Gastonia bones. A minimum of 6 individuals, but only 1 Utahraptor. And we're now in the process of redescribing it. To expand the hypodyne from the sickle claw to all the bones we have a Utahraptor in that site. Cross Arches, because that was on the other side of Arches National Park, which is an anticline. You got middle Jurassic rocks exposed, actually goes all the way to Paleozoic in the middle. And it comes down on the other side. It's the same sequence on the other side. But over here at Dalton Wells, BYU's worked the site since 1977. There's debate about which local person took them out to the site to begin with, and I've learned don't get in that debate. But it's not 124 million as BYU reported, much closer to 136 million by the University of Kansas guys. Let them fight it out, but there's a lot of data to support the 136 age for these upper yellow cat rocks. Basically, here's the poison strip above it. This is just a sand within the rocks, but it's full of dinosaur tracks. BYU collected a sauropod track out of that thing that's at least 3 feet across. It's huge, and you can see the claws on it. Under track, so it's totally free of the rock. Really neat. But the conglomerate is way up section, and I'm not sure they got the right contact yet. And we'll see because there's more work to be done. But they've pulled over 5,000 bones out of this site so far over 30 years and probably dug maybe 10% of the site. It is a huge, huge site. Some of the animals, of course, Utahraptor, minimum of 8 individuals, a Utahraptor, minimum of 4 individuals, a Gastonia burgei. You know, there were 6 at least at the Gaston Quarry, but very few Iguanodon bones. There are a lot of Iguanodon bones, but there are at least 2 taxa. Compare the tails of this one, probably a big Hippodraco, against these longer neural spines on their sail-backed Iguanodont. There's the Dinosaur Tracks. Nedclobertia occurs in that site. An orthomimid. Here's Moabosaurus with a plastered on head of Mirasaurus, since we have way more skull material. They have brain cases, 18 brain cases of that animal. We have 1 brain case, but we have most of the skull. Cedarosaurus, which is a brachiosaur, gizzard stones found in the ribber cage. Ken Carpenter dug this animal up, but it also occurs at Dalton Wells. There's at least 4 other dinosaurs in there, 2 theropods that haven't been named yet. It's pretty exciting stuff. But Utah State Park was passed this year by our legislature, and they gave $25 million to develop infrastructure. And it's kind of a barren wasteland right now, if you've looked at any of the press on it. But I'm hopeful that it will become a great site, even though most of the sites I've worked around the area, you know, this is a BYU site, so I don't mess with their site. But we have all these sites around it. There's egg sites in the Morrison there, egg sites in the Yellow cat here with this lake full of fish, all outside the site. Incredible Cedar Mountain track site, as I'll talk about in a little bit. Here's Dalton Wells itself. The quarry is right in there. Yeah, right on that bench there. Basically, this was a CCC camp in the 30s. These are the guys that built all the trails at Arches National Park. And then during World War II, it was an internment camp, the Moab Isolation Center, where they put the people they thought were the bad guys, and they put them in like solitary. There are 56 people here that were in solitary for 6 months. This was the nastiest place you could be as a Japanese internment victim during World War II. Those sites will be interpreted as part of the park. Also, the Upper Yellow Cat preserves the oldest bird tracks in the world. Based on our new dates, we have a possible oviraptorid that was named Utahraptor greenhornensis that occurs in the Upper Yellow Cat, but south of the Green River. Here's a nice picture by Pat Redman of naked Utahraptor taking on a Hippodraco. This is a Mike Skrepnik painting of a Moabosaurus being taken on by a couple of Hippodracos with, a couple of Utahraptors with Hippodracos and Gastonias wandering by. Of course, Ned Cobertia, it pretty well preserved in a number of sites. There's other animals in the Upper Yellow Cat. There's a primitive crocodilian, probably about a Meso-Usukian grade beast. Joe Surtz at Denver Museum is describing this, but it's a nice animal, and it's going to be pretty important. Of course, we've got Sphenodontid skull. We got Toxolophosaurus skull about that big. This is actually from Argentina, but it's the same type of herbivorous Sphenodontid. And then we got a big old mammal with a 7-centimeter long skull that we named Cephalodon a couple of years back. Cephalodon turns out to be a pretty significant animal. It was found right under the foot of the holotype of Hippodraco. The figure stepped on it, that's why the head's a little flattened. But it's a haramyid, and it's the first haramyid to be found in North America outside of the oldest ones from the Triassic of Greenland. But there's Cephalodon right there. See, it's up in the early Cretaceous. A lot of stuff known from Asia, all that yellow material. But there's also some stuff from Gondwana. And because of the relations of Cephalodon with stuff from North Africa and Gondwanatheres from Madagascar, it is now thought that Cephalodon is tied to the origin of Gondwanatheres. So we still have a link to Europe once again, but also across from Spain. There are teeth of this type of thing in Spain too, going into North Africa. So cross off Gondwanatheres being tied to multituberculates and put them up with the haramyids. Seems to be where it's going. Now, you've probably heard of this specimen. This was just collected at Stike's Quarry on Utahraptor Ridge. This is actually the official name of this ridge. We've got it as one of the geographic place names. You can name unnamed places in North America. It's not much paperwork. I did it in an afternoon, and in a week, it was official. But anyway, this is Utahraptor Ridge. And there's the Utahraptor Block. We can see here, 9 tons of Utahraptors and an Iguanodon. The top of the yellow cat, facies-wise, is here, but probably be mapped at the base of that sand, even though that sand is a coastline thing. Because we do see that the upper yellow cat is internally drained, and I'll explain why on that in a second. But at least, we're over 12 already, Utahraptors, but we got babies, juveniles, and at least one full adult. Now, if we look at this, here's the level of the oldest bird tracks. Here's the big calcrete that we see around much of this area, separating the lower yellow cat from the upper yellow cat. And we have bones in the lower yellow cat here. We got a nice Ankylosaur humerus down there. There's the Gaston block, the Utahraptor mega block in place there. This is the guy chance to fly around it with a helicopter. There's the poison strip interval, Ruby Ranch, and the Natarita. The thing to note is there's lake sediments under the site. It's encased with paleosols in a floodplain sequence. And this lake covers a lot of eastern Utah, or it could be a series of lakes. We refer to Lake Madsen because of his early work in that as we were first starting to play with the Cedar Mountain Formation. But these lake beds, they have ostracods, and we're going to try to see if we can get some pollen out of these things, which we haven't tried to do yet. Now, what is it? You know, when we first dig in the site, we thought, oh, we have a channel deposit, you know, and we were expecting we'd take out bones. There are too many bones. You can't put an ice pick into that thing without hitting a skeleton. So we figured, oh, at some point, sort of channel, it's going to go back, and we're going to just have to rock saw the back off it and take out a block, you know, in big blocks. However, as we went around it, it ended up against the red mudstone. And looking at that, let's see, we can see it now. We can't see that. Basically, I figured, man, this thing is, you know, a blob, you know, within floodplain sediments. And we were on a trip taking our board out to show them some geology. And this is the delta at Lake Powell, looking down from an overlook down on it. The river is like below my, you know, feet. You can't see the river. But this is the delta. You know, lake levels have been low. They're going lower again, which is going to be interesting because it makes it a natural laboratory. But as lake levels went down, the sediment accumulating in the delta starts compacting. Water doesn't compact, so it's got to go somewhere, and it comes up. And in the case of like there and there, it's bringing sand up with it. That's a sand volcano on the delta. But all these pits you see like this, these are all dewatering features. When there's a hydraulic head on this, basically the water comes up through it, bringing sand and sediment up, stirring it up, churning. A lot of methane we've discovered. My buddy Ed Simpson's been studying this a lot down there, Lake Powell. A lot of methane, organics being decomposed. When you take the hydraulic head off, it collapses. It's not a mire. You know, these things don't collapse. These things collapse. And this is one of Ed's diagrams with me. We got this published in Paleos. Basically, here's the site. You can see paleosol nodules in here. Beach sand just under here. I mean, basically what happened is sand came in. There's a big dike under here. This was a mass that was right there. There's a mass here. And basically sand was coming up through there, bulging this floodplain. These are rippled sands. The lake comes in again up here. But basically comes up through these rippled sands. The hydraulic head, when it came off it, which you might have done more than one time, we've got a lot to learn about this block. So we're being really careful using photogrammetry to map all the bones in it. But you can see the collapse features. Take the hydraulic head, and this whole thing collapsed. Originally, this is maybe part of the sand volcano. Here, these sands here, we're not quite sure yet. But we think it was up at that level and collapsed down into the floodplain sediments to there when the hydraulic head was removed. Getting it out, we built a big sledge, 12 by 12 beams and 10 by 10 beams, pre-cut, pre-drilled in Salt Lake City from careful measurements, and IKEA would be proud of us. They went together tight as a tick, thanks to the engineering of one of our volunteers, Phil Policelli. Quite remarkable. So here's the block being pulled off by a track hoe. We tried to get a helicopter for 3 years. No success there at all. And you know, we had to collect it because there definitely there was some damage. You know, when we took the cap off, the top inch or two was pretty weathered just from being out like that for 3 years. Couldn't backfill over it on the edge of that cliff. But we got it pulled off. We had to build a road up to it. Fortunately, it was state land, and so I got permission to do that. Pulled the thing off the cliff. There we are going down the hill. There it is, pulling back. The beams were trying to rip up. So we got skids, there are guardrail skids under it, which helped a lot, keeping it from tearing up the frame. So we went through, but finally we got into the parking lot, and then the price of oil collapsed. Scott Matson got laid off, our chief preparator for this block, and we had to sit in the parking lot, and I was being yelled at to get it out of the parking lot. It wouldn't fit in our lab, wouldn't fit at the University of Utah, so we were in trouble. The American Museum of Ancient Life at Thanksgiving Point allowed us to bring it into their lab. Jim Cross Marine Projects, paid for the move. He also helped us use his shop for us to build the frame. And we worked on it there for 5 years. But pretty tough place to work. You know, it's 30 miles from our shop, and we also have other duties. And we had to raise money to pay Scott to work on it. And those first few years were mainly trying to get microscopes and things so we could do it right. But after 5 years, we had to move it again. Our new director is a pretty nice guy, and he dug up money to fix this. Really, it was a ghetto storeroom into a nice dedicated lab. Wheeled it in. Here's the scopes on it, and here's part of the block there, and you can see skeletons there, vertebral column, vertebral column, vertebral column. There's like 3 animals laid in together, juveniles. We also do have a big adult from this site. But we interpret it as a bunch of animals trapped in quicksand, maybe a family group or pack of Utahraptors. Once again, the good science on this is going to come out from the next generation. So our job is to prepare it and to work hard to see that it's handed into the future as in the best condition possible. This is a nice piece of art by Julius Casove up in Alberta. Once again, looking at the site, brought the University of Kansas in. They've dated 10 paleosols through the yellow cat. These are the first dates that came out near the bottom at the second calcrete down. It's a stack of calcretes about that level. Got the 136 there. Got another date up here that might be around 137, but they've been working at massaging this stuff for a while. But the laser ablation dates are basically of zircons, which are virtually indestructible, taken out of paleosols. So interstitial stuff in these big calcretes and these paleosols. And, the chances are if an ash came down there, it would get reworked into the sediment. The nature of the sediment might alter it so it's not even cementite anymore, but the zircons are going to sit there and just wait their turn for someone to go in and date them. Now, these rocks, I talked about a lake. Well, basically, it seems to be an internally drained basin. And the reason for it is salt. The Paradox Basin is the Foreland Basin developed on the west side of the Uncompadre uplift. And 3,000 feet of salt was deposited within it during the Pennsylvanian, probably not into the Permian, probably all Pennsylvanian salt. And back then we had an ice age. So when sea levels rose between glacial intervals, water would spill into the Paradox Basin. When the glaciers cause sea level to fall, it would evaporate. So we ended up getting 3,000 feet of salt pumped into this system, basically by glacial eustatic changes in sea level. Now, salt is plastic. It never turns into a rock fully. So we develop, and in this area, what we get are salt anticlines. We get huge walls of salt that come up, flex the rocks around them, and at arches, they breach the surface. And were cut by the Colorado River, which basically dissolved the salt out, collapsing Salt Valley to give us such nice exposures of the Entrada with its arches on either side. But the salt is very plastic, and when it's coming up, things tend to thin over the top of them, get what's called turtle structures, but as salt comes out and into the top, there's subsidence around them. Now, if you look at the distribution of Utahraptor skeletons, there's 4 quarries that produce skeletal remains: the Dalton Wells Quarry at Utahraptor State Park, the Stikes Quarry at Utahraptor Ridge, the Gaston Quarry, and a BYU quarry. This is the only one on BLM land, Blaine too, which has got very nice preservation. They got quite a lot of Utahraptor material out of that. This is like the dominant predator of these rocks. But anyway, we see, you know, oh, it's coming around, some big salt structure. But because it's only in the north, we think salt's also moving south and causing this whole region to subside, to give us this northern basin. And because it's subsiding, streams and rivers tend to form lakes and ponds within it. So we have largely, the upper Yellowcat particularly, is a very wet environment. There's lots of ponds. It's probably wet in the lower Yellowcat too, but we're stacking paleosols with those peat beds, and those peat beds were probably representing pretty wet environments. Now, the Smithsonian's Carol Houghton's been working on the pollen with us, and we've recently found some ponds with real good pollen preservation. And she's just excited about this stuff, because in her mind, this is the best preserved pre-angiosperm palynomorph assemblage she's ever seen in North America. And there's sites where we've collected this stuff where there are 40 taxa, you know, and it's beautiful, you know. So I'm really excited to see what she comes up with in the final paper. And we're kind of waiting because we're trying to get an ash date associated with some of her best sites from a literal volcanic ash. But this is the geometry going east-west across the northern end of the Paradox Basin. And if you look at this Yellowcat member, the lower fauna, fauna 1 down here, lower 2 fauna here, and then this poison strip member pretty much going across the whole area, but fairly thick within the middle part of the basin. And here's Salt Valley Anticline. This is Arches National Park coming up through here. And that's pretty neat, but with a lot of fish in the upper Yellowcat, suggesting strongly that, you know, we have serious ponds. We get freshwater sharks and fish, aquatic turtles, etc. But also note this, Lake Carpenter at the top of the Ruby Ranch interval under the Cenomanian Natarita erosion surface. That's a big, thick section of lacustrine beds. In fact, the limestones, let's give a whole talk on this, look like Milankovitch cycles. This is serious bedded dolomites and black shales. There's fish material, caddisflies, all kinds of plants, then particularly lower part. It's a real interesting unit, needs a lot more work. And it's only on the west side of Arches. Otherwise, the Ruby Ranch is pretty consistent in thickness. Now, the poison strip member isn't as rich with skeletons, but there's some decent sites. No doubt about it. Ken Carpenter's done a lot of good stuff in Laurie's site and around it, Tony's site as well. But this is the type section, basically running up through here. That's where I climbed through it. But I probably didn't even measure to the real top of the poison strip here. But I did get a couple of sands. But this is poison strip. This thing goes for about 5 miles. This big escarpment here. But there's lower Yellowcat, upper, and you can see why everyone's just assumed that was all Morrison going up to the poison strip. And many of the old time uranium guys would call the poison strip the Buckhorn Conglomerate. Yeah, it's gravelly. It's not a cobbled conglomerate by any means, but it's full logs, cycads. Only cycads I've ever seen in the wild from the poison strip. Though they've been collected out pretty good, I'll tell you. The fauna includes Platycoxa dicroyi that Ken named. The pelvis, you've really got to hold it because it's got some real weird bench, shelves on it. But it's also known from the Lakota Formation, at least by the interpretation of Ken Carpenter, which I find real interesting. Cedar rictes, I think, is just an adult of Platycoxa. Ken named both of them. We have another elephant-sized polacanthine, big brute, but with massive armor. I mean, this stuff is huge. This thing is, you know, solid bone going down under. In fact, the base of these are almost always convex. They're not hollowed out at all like most ankylosaurs are. Big, solid armor, big, high points on them. I mean, these guys is carrying a lot of weight. Vanasaurus, this is a titanosauromorph, certainly a step above the Brachiosaurs in this bed. We correlate this thing because his Gastonia lori mcwinnii, I have a strong feeling it needs to be tested. You know, good thesis needs to be done on Gastonia. I think it's Hoplitosaurus. There's some pretty strong differences that it has that Hoplitosaurus has and Gastonia doesn't. So I tend to think it's Hoplitosaurus. Planet Coxa, he identifies up in Lakota in the Black Hills region. And of course, we get the Icododon, there's Hoplitosaurus face, Hypsilophodonts, which we also have in the upper yellow cat. They just haven't been described yet. We'll get more eventually. Someone will get more. So the lower Ruby Ranch member above those rocks, in the eastern part, as I told you, you know, is quite a bit thinner than it is to the west, except for that lake sequence, Lake Carpenter. Generally is on the order of, you know, 10 to 30 meters thick, and that's about it. Overlapped by the Natarita, but we do have some skeletal remains in the Ruby Ranch on this side in the Paradox Basin. Brontomerus McIntoshi was named from these rocks. Thunder thighs, Brontomerus, thunder thighs, McIntoshi. We've got 6 spines or so and a humerus that look very close to Sauropelta, which is known from the Cloverleaf Formation. We have teeth and some bones. There's more to come, I'm sure, from the Long Walk Quarry of a big carnosaur. Here's Brontomerus. This is how I found the ilium. I excavated the site, and that's what it looked like. It had a hole in it because our shim for flipping the jacket was under the scapula, but we didn't even know it was there. Went right through the ilium, sadly. But when they reconstructed it, the shape really changed from what we had. And it fits into impressions in the jacket. That's the real shape of it right there. And there are pieces missing that were there originally. So I don't know what happened. This we collected with a permit with the University of Oklahoma. So Randy Needham and Scott Madsen worked with me on this site. It all went off to Oklahoma after we prepared it. Anyway, we also have a Tyrannosaurus at this level, maybe true Tyrannosaurus. But when we look at this stuff, it seems to tie to the Cloverleaf Formation. We have a true nodosaur, Sauropelta, not a Polacanthine, my babies from the yellow cat poison strip, Deinonychus. There's Deinonychus material known from the Ruby Ranch, Sauroposeidon. There's some incredibly long, slender cervical vertebra that seem very similar to Sauroposeidon. Might be something different. And I said Tyrannosaurus, Equilops, a little Ceratopsian, which we don't have there yet, but give us time. But the ages, you know, this is mostly mid-Aptian, early Albian, because we're pretty sure the poison strip includes early Aptian strata based on detrital zircons. With rising sea level at this time, North America really became isolated, kind of like Australia, an island continent. So from about 120 to about 100 million, North America was isolated and really developed this endemic cloverleaf style fauna. Now, you know, I like ankylosaurs a heck of a lot. This is the phylogeny that Mark Alone and I have been working. We actually Mark produced a new tree just the other day. This is from 2013, so we got to get our butts in gear and get it published. But getting to work with this in Spain on Utahraptor, I began to realize that all the European nodosaurs formed a single clade. All the North American ones form another clade. And this is how it comes out. This is about 300 characters that we use. And what we see is the polacanthines drop out And then we see nodosaurs in beds both in Europe and in North America at the same time. But in Europe, Struthiosaurs and nodosaurs from North America are already split. So I kind of think of these things as developing on some islands as the North Atlantic opened, and one hopped over here to fill in for the Polacanthines that went out, and Stegosaurs that went out over here, and then the nodosaurs, and then the Struthiosaurs in Europe. Asia looks interesting. I think this turnover may be when we lose the Tachysaurs in Asia, not sure, but it seemed like we lose Stegosaurs. We lose all the Polacanthines. But what's interesting, these guys here at the bottom in Asia seem to be Polacanthines. So really, Polacanthines don't even appear in Asia until after they go extinct in North America. So it's pretty interesting. This area of the tree is getting worked out. But once again, this ties to that North American European division. And I think we're really seeing it at this extinction or faunal turnover level. And within the Aptian, we're fully separated from Europe from that point on. So just want to say this Aptian turnover was not previously recognized. The three faunas we have here are related to each other. Then boom, we get in the Ruby Ranch. They look like cloverleaf style things with related animals. Notice Polacanthines, big dromaeosaurs, broad-toothed brachiosaurs and sauropods here, slender-toothed brachiosaurs, nodosaurs, tenontosaurs. We lose all the stericosternid iguanodonts that are more derived. You get these much more primitive tenontosaurs replacing them in North America. Very interesting. And then the muslin touches you'll see is another fauna that's very distinctive. Here's Lake Carpenter. These are the lake beds above this big river channel. I mean, we have cross beds here that are 30 feet across. I mean, it's amazing what we have. But there's some ashes in here with some limestone or dolomites beds. Good date, around 115. We're still waiting for Marina to publish the date, but she's got the final dates. Trying to get that thing wrapped up. But these beds, I kind of refer to 4.5 because it's clearly above the other stuff, but we have nothing to tie it to the younger Ruby Ranch on the other side of the San Rafael swell. But the dolomite down near that big ash, a 15-centimeter ash we got dated. So it's a good ash. We've got the Mill Canyon track site. I think this is the most diverse track site in North America, at least in the United States. There's at least 10 taxa. That's turtle. These are big carnosaur, crocodilian, swish marks. We have resting traces, croc tracks, ornithomimid tracks, trackways of ornithomimids. We got a trackway of a nodosaur, probably sauropods. Here's a bunch of sauropod tracks. Here's raptor tracks, two toes, probably Deinonychus or Deinonychid tracks. Incredible site, been interpreted. Rebecca Hunt Foster did a magnificent job. Brian Eng did the artwork. He basically drew the track site as it appeared to him, and we made sure he didn't put any mountains in the skyline because there were none in the site. An amazing site. I really recommend you visit. Now, the Ruby Ranch is loaded with carbonate, I said. I worked with Greg Ludwigson, Matt Jokel at Nebraska. Greg used to be at Iowa, now he's at Kansas, getting ready to retire, collecting carbonates, looking at sections. This is up at Dinosaur National Monument. This is on the north end of the San Rafael swell. Look at that big monster calcrete in the Ruby Ranch. Trouble is, people were starting to think we had a calcrete and we could measure that everywhere. And now there's other calcretes. You got to watch what you're doing before committing. But the carbonates give us a lot of carbon. They give us a lot of oxygen data that we can compare with each other, as do the dinosaurs provide, oxygen as well. So we can look at this stuff. Marina, Selena. Here's Marina, that's Selena. Suarez, my geochem gurus, replacing Greg Ludwigsen in that role. Basically, stable isotopes, same element with different numbers of neutrons, which give them different weights. The different in weight or mass causes them to react differently in chemical, physical, and biologic processes. You know, it's a little easier to deal with the light one than the heavier one. So certain processes fractionate the light version from the heavy version in various amounts. If you look at the teeth, it's one of those big theropods. That's from Doling's Bowl. You can see all the little micro drill marks. Looking at the enamel, getting those isotope data. There's no snowpack melts there. That's one of the things you can do is look at a flush of light oxygen in the drinking water. So you get your oxygen, they drink carbon in the food of plants for plant eaters. Soil carbonates record atmospheric chemistries pretty well. There's back tests that they do to make sure it's reasonable. But the world during this time interval, the early Cretaceous, there were global oceanic anoxic events. And these things were really significant. A whole bunch of the world's oil was buried as organic materials during this time interval. You know, well more than half of the oil in the world you can look at from early Cretaceous and a couple other oceanic anoxic events. But they cause the atmospheric carbon ratios to change so much that it gives you a global signal if you have a long enough record of carbon that you can look at changes in that signal and a few dates here and there that you can calibrate your curves. Here is carbon correlations, preliminary to some degree. They're published in 2015 by Greg and gang, showing between the Ruby Ranch Road, the type Ruby Ranch, remember the Ruby Ranch is full of carbonate, and the Price River 2 area. And there's not a lot of carbonate in the upper part. And we actually thought that was mustn't touch it member at first, but now we call it this stuff, the transitional phase, going toward the mustn't touch it. It's definitely Albian age stuff based on dates in those rocks. The Aptian Albian boundary we put right about there in these curves. But you get a sense of, you know, here's a big kick, big anoxic event, OAA, you know, 1B. But you can follow that across. And then this is a calibrated system showing the segments. You know, so each segment got different designation. Think of this like paleomag, the way people use it. And but up here is where we get evidence of snow melt coming off. No snow melt down here, but we get evidence of a rain shadow. We'll talk more about that later. The Upper Ruby Ranch dinosaurs, not so well known. Slender tooth Brachiosaurs, Abetosaurus macintoshi was named up at Dinosaur National Monument, and rocks that were dated at about 104 million. There's still Tenonosaur looking primitive iguanodonts there. When we look at a cross section of Utah in the east following I-70, you can take this drive and look at the Upper Cretaceous pretty nicely as you go through. Swell kind of disrupts that view, but it's important in the scheme of things. Here's arches, these salt uplifts, salt moving south, giving us a basin there. But the Upper Cretaceous, we get a foreland basin, like we had with the paradox, but formed in front of the severe thrust belt. You uplift the mountains, the weight of that massive mountain pushes down and causes a basin to form in the front of it. And this is the cloud goes all the way to Canada, this foreland basin. But we're able to date pretty well with these rocks when it's forming. Basically, when we look at this stuff down here, the lower Cedar Mountain is salt. You know, all that salt doesn't even exist over here. It's highly diachronous. The cloverleaf Fauna 4 crosses Fauna 5 is only known on the west side, north side of the swell. And then, of course, the mustn't touch it member, which is basal Upper Cretaceous, honorary early Cretaceous. It's only on the western part of the swell. And the first Pebbles Eureka quartzite, Ordovician part of the high wall of the severe thrust belt really begin to appear at the base of the upper Cretaceous. And of course, we superimpose that with radiometric dates. Prehistoric Museum, Utah State University's Price River Quarries, huge site, goes for about a mile. Lots of mired sauropods, Brachiosaurus, CF sauroposeidon. Right where I'm standing practically, a little further behind me, is a skeleton, I think articulated, of a huge theropod similar to Acrocanthosaurus. They have a giant nodosaur, Pleuropleides, a giant, I used to think as an Ankylosaur, it's clading out as the base of the nodosaurs, maybe tied to Urahraptor, which is interesting. But another giant Ankylosaur in the same quarry, Cedar pelta, and their skeletons are quite different. You can tell them apart. Up at Dinosaur National Monument, we don't subdivide it up there, the Cedar Mountain. Betasaurus was found there in rocks dated at 105. So in Dakota, we call the sand there the muddy, because it ties to Wyoming and is early Cretaceous in age. There's the Maori shale that correlates directly with the Mudstone. That's that line correlation that we have published multiple times. Ron Blakey's brilliant book, wonderful book. I love it. I love it. The most inaccurate picture in his whole book is on the cover, the early Cretaceous. This is much more accurate in what's going on relative to the thrust belt. We got a Deinonychus Tyrannosaurus site in rocks in the transition zone dated 103. The Tyrannosauroid, because it's probably not Tyrannosaurus at 103 million, has Deinonychid teeth in with the skeleton and some little coyote coprolites, except they're probably Deinonychid coprolites. And we're going to micro CT scan this and look for feathers. These feathers are totally indigestible and should, from preening, appear in his coprolites. We shall see. Stay tuned. As I said, the upper Ruby Ranch Fauna 5 is only on the west, and the Mustantouchid is only on the west, over in this area. The swell going through right about there. The Mustantouchid member has produced a very diverse vertebrate fauna. You know, I'm saying, you know, they got 90 plus taxa. They probably have over 100 taxa. It's one of the most diverse faunas in the Mesozoic in North America. And a lot of that's due to rich cephali, screen washing, 50 tons or more from a dozen or so sites. There's a lot of microsites out here. But this is real wet. There's a lot of lignite. It's quite smectitic. There's pretty much no carbonate nodules in it whatsoever. So if you're gonna look at carbon, you gotta look at the lignites. You know, dinosaur teeth, very diverse, includes ceratopsian teeth and Ipsilophodont. Tiny sauropod teeth. Look at the wear on that, classic sauropod wear. But that's the biggest tooth we've ever found. Screen washing is that little one that's like 0.5 centimeter long crown. Truadant, Dromaeosaurs, very likely Tyrannosaurs. That one right there is really D-shaped in cross section, classic character. But in terms of skeletons, Eolambia is extraordinarily abundant. There's probably hundreds of individuals represented in what's been collected so far. That's actually a thumb spike. They have rounded thumb spikes, but that's the thumb spike for this guy. But it's a hadrosauroid. The teeth are definitely more toward hadrosaurs, close to Bactrosaurus from Asia. So this is showing the beginnings of migrations into North America from Asia. Here's an Odosaur Anamantarx, first dinosaur ever found purely by technology. Ray Jones discovered it looking at one of our Eolambia sites with low-level radiation, mapping it very precisely, said dig here. We dug. That skeleton was there with a good portion of the skull. Really exciting. Pete Makovicki, field trip I led in 2000, I think it was the GSA trip. Yeah, he joined this GSA trip. He came out and immediately looked at the Mustantouchid on that field trip. So I've got to start looking at it because the preservation's awesome. But he got very sick of Eolambia after a while. But They found this giant Carcharodontosaur, Neovenatorid, Seats. This is pretty much what they got at this point, but it's a huge animal, monstrous. Moros is the smaller Tyrannosaur. They make it a lot smaller than it is. I think it gets to like 20 feet. It's not giant, but it's certainly not a tiny thing. Really exciting. But Lindsay's been running crews from North Carolina. Pete still comes out, runs crews from the Field Museum, brings a Kiko out. And it's always nice, mixes very nice cocktails. But one of the things that's been discovered was there's dinosaur eggshell everywhere. I mean, there's lots of eggshell conglomerates, multiple taxa. But one of the taxa was re-identified as Megaelongolithus based on shell structure. This is an egg, I think, from Asia. And Megaelongolithus had been found to be a giant oviraptorid, probably Gigantoraptor. And you see a man there, that's a 30-foot long oviraptorid. And they have these huge elongated eggs, very characteristic surface textural prismatic calcite structure. Well, Lindsay's crew on the south end of the swell, San Rafael swell, southwest side, she's got now 2 nests. And here's some of these big eggs. And these things are, over a foot long each. They used to think they were tyrannosaurs in Asia, until they found a juvenile of a Gigantoraptor in one of the nests. And they realized that's what it is. Because the shell's just like Uongolithus, the oviraptor eggs. So the eggshell predicted the animal, and Pete found part of a skeleton of a giant oviraptor. So it's come full circle. But it started with the eggshell fragments, predicting a giant oviraptor. Basically, what we're seeing is the first immigration of animals from Asia, though that's a Canig-Nathan. That may be going from here to Asia. And we probably did share some animals in that direction too. But Eolambia is pretty clearly an Asian animal coming over and kicking our stuff out. We lose sauropods in North America. Why? Don't know, but they are gone after this until the very end of the Cretaceous. So this is the first great North American Asian faunal interchange. And the mustn't touch it spans. There's stuff that's holdovers from the Cloverleaf, like Seats, and there's things like Moros, the Tyrannosaur, that are probably the new things coming in the Eolambia. So we got the mix of these faunas in this interval, and there's a lot of ashes in it, a lot of radiometric dates, and it spans about 2.5 million years of the base of the Cenomanian. So that interval, you see, it doesn't take a lot of time. It's probably transitional, showing the first migrations from Asia. And that's really exciting. So you start looking at that, of course, the end of the Jurassic, that extinction, can't say a lot about it. Mid-Aptian one, big faunal change there. And the mustn't touch it is the transition and really the origin of the late Cretaceous fauna of North America. Though it's probably got sporadic connections where animals came and went from Asia, probably along the Pacific Coast Highway, in my opinion. So basically, that's a wrap up of what we've got. The next generation's got some work ahead of them to prove how much BS is Jim full of. But there's a lot of work to be done. It's exciting. I just wish I was immortal so I could see what we know in 100 years. So we need people to keep it up. But I couldn't list everybody that's helped me with this, but it is a huge number of people over the years that I've talked to, that I've worked with in the field, that I've worked with in their museums, that have all added to bringing this story to the point it is at the moment. And it's still an uphill climb, but we're pretty excited about it. Anyway, thank you very much. And if we got questions, and you can still stand to listen to me, I'm ready.
Jim, what happened to the tracks that we used to walk around to get to the indurated limestone at the Yellow Cat Quarry, the Gaston Quarry, back in the early 1990s? This is Malcolm from the Western Interior.
Yeah, I recognize your voice, Malcolm. I don't get it yet, but I need to shrink this somehow. I don't know how I do that. Screen. But there's some tracks, you know, as you know, down by the road. Those Iguanodon tracks, Randy Needham was near where I was talking about Dalton Wells, or really from there. I don't have a good picture of their tracks, just to get that point across. But that track site, you know, we found some stuff. I think we've pretty much collected what's on the surface in that spot. But new sites we want to test dig this summer, you know, walking out to them, there are more tracks laying on the ground. A lot of under tracks laying on the ground, all through the Cedar Mountain. There's a lot of track sites.
Just impressed us
part
so
of the
much
story.
when you had bones. That they
Now
were
there's
so
tracks. Now we're getting pollen. You know, we're getting so much. Of course, I didn't talk about the ostracods and charophytes, and you know, there's just so many lines of evidence coming together. That's why we go for the old ages. The charophytes say it, the pollen says it, the ostracods say it, and the new uranium lead dates say it. And
did you ever find out why that limestone was so indurated?
it's just diagenic. And it's probably on the margin of the lake, same Lake Matson. In fact, that site's only 6 miles from Utahraptor Ridge. And so I basically think that site's on the shore, the regressive shore of the same lake, where the Utahraptor, you know, Block quicksand deposit was formed. You know, only 6 miles away, same body of water. So I think
thanks for giving me
they're the same
time.
Well, it's pretty likely.
Thanks for giving me some time.
You walk over and shake hands.
I'm astonished to see how much you've done out there since those days. It was just a great big unknown.
Oh yeah, we didn't know anything. You know, I mean, Jack Horner was always pushing me, going, Utahraptor's just a big adult Deinonychus. It's just, you know, what do you do? How do I minimize this so I can see people? Yeah, and the slideshow. Oops. Now maybe I can see some folks.
Yeah, I agree with Lou Taylor. Well done. Well done.
Yeah, there's so much out there. I mean, you know, there's 20 talks there, you know, spliced together into one. I mean, that Lake Carpenter stuff, we took a trench hoe to it. Had groups from United Arab Emirates working with us, and Kansas and Texas, and you know, big crew of about a dozen grad students from different schools. And there's going to be a lot of theses out of that thing. You know, we reclaimed it very nicely. You go out there, you're not going to see where we track hoed it to like 12 feet deep and 8 feet across. As I learned from Earl Kaufman to dig a trench. Okay, how do I see the people, the happy faces?
Corner, Jim, where it says view.
Oh, there we go. Someone did something. It wasn't me.
So we have some questions here.
Okay, I'm ready.
The first one came about 3/4 away through your talk, and you may have answered this. Sarah Campagna, I'm so sorry if I butchered that, asked if you could tell us more about the eggs you mentioned, which I think you did cover some of that, but did he answer that question, Sarah?
Yeah, I just wanted to hear more
Well,
about
those eggs are a lot older than the eggs at the end. BYU thinks they have part of a Utahraptor nest. They haven't let me see it. But, you know, what am I going to do? Look at eggs and know what I'm looking at? But they got part of a nest with about 4 eggs from about 1,000 feet west of the Dalton Wells quarry, the same level. It's actually where they got that 124 radiometric date out of tridal zircons, which is, I think, fairly meaningless myself. But you know, basically, I'm hoping to hear more about that eventually. I mean, they got a lot of important stuff at BYU. There is no doubt about it. And hopefully, at least, you know, they published on Moabosaurus, but I use Mirasaurus as a prod. Said, I do not know how to skunk you if they turn out to be the same thing.
And then JP had a question, but I'm going to let him ask it.
Okay.
Maybe if he unmutes himself.
He's probably sleeping.
There he goes.
Yes, JP.
JP, are you going to ask your question? Yeah, I still can't hear you. All right. He was wondering, how do you ID bird tracks as opposed to small dinosaurs?
Well, the variants of the toes and whatnot. I mean, these are exactly like the bird tracks in Korea and elsewhere. You know, they look like bird tracks. I mean, I really like to tell people I don't do tracks. You know, and if I find a track site, you know, Martin Lockley will be in there. You know, I don't even have to tell anybody. He just smells the fact that I found a track site. It shows up. But yeah, I think they're bird tracks. You know, our colleagues in Canada, agree with us on that. And the thing that's really exciting is, initially we thought they were about 124, which would be the same age as the stuff in Gansu, China, and in Korea. So I was thinking for a while that this represents the time when we first start getting shorebirds, you know, where tracks would be preserved, and that the origin of shorebirds caused tracks to appear on marginal shores all over the northern hemisphere about the same time. But the new date suggests that stuff is like 135 million. So it's, it could be a good 10 million years older than those other sites. Once again, dating, more lines of evidence, we just got to pile it on. We've got an amazing story, and the precision of our dating is going to be critical, and really understanding the significance of this. One of the things we found that I think is amazing is the evidence for the rain shadow, is pretty much near the base of the Valanginian. Showing severe thrusting enough for a rain shadow. Isotope work east-west shows the effects of that on the oxygen isotopes and the carbonate. But we don't see evidence of a foreland basin form until pretty much the end of the Aptian. That's like 20 million years later. And, I was taught geology that the foreland basin is pretty much instantaneous geologically with thrusting. Well, 20 million years, even geologically, I don't consider instantaneous. So I think that's pretty sexy science. And, we need to get more of the tectonicist types to start looking at that, because, the data is piling up. And, we're real lucky because we have this basin that's preserving older rocks in the early Cretaceous than anywhere else. Because what we have, there's no severe thrust belt, Ben Berger, sorry, in the Jurassic. And what we have is an interval of quiescence, and basically sediment bypass, just quiet. Western North America is just quiet, and we end up developing this unconformity. And as when you do detrital zircons on the very base with Cedar Mountain, it's all reworked Morrison, but it's just getting reworked and spread out and, ending up toward the Gulf in various places. But, that basin subsidence, because of salt moving south, gave us sediment that we don't see anywhere along the Rocky Mountain front, anywhere else. The Buckhorn Conglomerate, that Ankylosaur, some of those sediments could be equivalent, but you don't get a lot of good dinosaur material or any other fossil material in conglomerates like that. Cobble conglomerates just aren't good for bones. But that's what you get going all the way up. And there's some Canadian stuff where they got some ankylosaur fragments, in rock like that way up in the mountains that they think is Berriasian. And it's like, well, so can you really date it? They're using pollen that a lot of people dispute. Once again, more work. It's not all done. Your job, if you choose to take it, is to prove I'm an idiot.
So Yeah, I'm unmuted. So, sorry.
Yeah.
Robert was wondering, with the holotype of Iguana Colossus, how do you know it's an iguanodont with very few bones and without any remains of the thumb spike?
Well, we got teeth. Thumb spike's actually not that critically important. Camptosaurs are iguanodonts, and they don't have a thumb spike. But it is the Styracosternid iguanodont, which are the ones with thumb spikes. You know, it's above Camptosaurs. And it's based on cranial structure, tooth structure, vertebra, the pelvis. Andrew McDonald, who's at, the Western Science Center in California, he described that stuff. I learned with Eolambia, I should stay away from ornithischians or ornithopods. I do play with ornithischians. But, it's pretty convincing. Other people who worked on this stuff seem to support it. And the new site, Dolling's Bowl, which seems to have the same kind of animal, we've got maybe 20 or more animals. I mean, we're talking about skull material growth series, femurs from, 15 centimeters to 3.5 feet, size range, and bunches of them. It was a cat, what's her name, was doing histology on them. And I hope she finishes her PhD, because it's one of her big chapters, is looking at the growth history of Iguana Colossus and showing us that, what we have at Dolling's Bowl is growing to be that big. That's kind of the question, I put forth to her.
And so another follow-up question to that is, I was wondering from that name, Iguana Colossus, I was wondering, has it at any point been considered a species of iguanodon by some? Because I also asked this because I do remember watching, even though this documentary is probably, I don't know, it's very out of date. It's Walking with Dinosaurs, and I saw it one episode.
Oh, it's hugely out of date.
It did have
5 years ago. It's hugely out of date.
It did show Iguanodon in North America alongside with Utahraptor, and so
that's based on talking to me.
Yeah, was this or any iguanodonts in North America ever considered a species of iguanodon at one point?
Yeah, Dakotodon was named initially as iguanodon. Hippodraco Ostermazei, which Andrew named Hippodraco Skeletons, but I'm pretty sure Iguanodon Ostermazei is the same thing. They were named as iguanodon because they named everything as iguanodon, in the old days. It's like Megalosaurus. You got a big carnosaur, not enough bones to do, to show it as something independent for sure. So you just make it a megalosaur, no matter what continent it's on or what age it is. And that's pretty much what they did with iguanodon. And everything we found is more primitive. I had Dave Norman and Andrew Milner out touring them around one time, and like 15 years ago, 20 years ago now, actually 20. And they looking at me and said, Jim, I think this stuff is older than you think. From their experience looking at the Wealden stuff in southern Britain. And I have to admit that the iguanodonts are all more primitive. Hippodraco's more primitive. They're all more primitive, and then they go extinct. They're Styracosternid. They have, they're in that group, but then they go extinct. And Tyrannosaurus is probably from a small little Hypsilophodon grade iguanodon form that gets big to fill the role of a bipedal plant eater, or quadrupedal bipedal plant eater. And people have known from Kathy Forster, knew that Tyrannosaurus was something really different than you would expect, given the age of the rocks. And it's part of that mass extinction it seems to be in the Aptian. It's not the base of the Aptian. It seems to be in the Aptian. Though, better resolution will help that story. No doubt about it.
Definitely sounds like it's more used for relative dating instead of numeric dating.
Well, iguanodonts, as a group, first appear, Iguana Colossus is considered the most primitive Styracosternid iguanodont. And where you shift from them to hadrosaur forms like Eolambia, that's a transitional interval, and that's pretty much recorded in Asia, where where do we draw the line? Because it's basically this huge comb of things branching off all the way up to hadrosaurs, and you got to decide, okay, right here is where I'm going to call them something different. Iguanodonts need a lot more work, but the amount of fossil material being found globally, is really remarkable. There's a real neat story coming out, and once again, immortality would make me happy just to see what they're going to figure out.
Well, I hope this story gets out soon to the public.
Yeah, I like to. There's a bunch of animals at BYU I'd like to see come out soon. Some of which have been in their lab for 20 years.
That actually ties into a question. Aaron Courier asked, how many species of dinos total have been identified in the Cretaceous of Utah?
In the Cretaceous, oh man, I have to drop off the Morrison.
It doesn't have to be just Cretaceous, and
yeah.
From what you're studying.
Yeah, in our stuff, probably about 65 taxa. I mean, I'm working on a paper now to name 3 more polacanthines from the Cedar Mountain. So just in the yellow cat-through poison strip, we have like 7 polacanthine taxa that we have pretty complete material of each one of them. And what's interesting, they're like ceratopsians. The bodies are all pretty much polacanthine bodies. They're not, you can tell them easy from Nodosaurs or Ankylosaurs, but they're all fairly similar skeletally, but the armor is vastly different. Even the dorsal scutes in the back, are structured differently. So you got 100 of these scutes, and it's like, yeah, none of them are like these, and so you can tell these things apart pretty readily. And people just haven't looked at the armor closely until us, but it's become real clear to us that the armor is like ceratopsian frills. It's what they're showing off. Some of these guys, Ankylosaurs particularly, and polacanthines, have pretty forward-directed eyes. And they're not doing it to attack prey animals. They're plant eaters. I think it's for interspecific competition, and those pterygoid processes, those big processes, have a sliding joint with the pterygoid. I think it's a shock absorber for head pounding. That they're like some of the therapsids. Those guys, they come up to each other and go, humph, and, just push their legs forward and whack their heads together. And it's one reason I think a lot of them have fairly domed heads. But biomechanics of that, it's got to happen. CT scanning and, the kind of data that's just sitting in the at Larry Whitmer's lab and others, new people are going to apply that to different parts of those animals and tell different parts of their story that haven't been told yet, even though there's great data available.
So a quick follow-up to that, how does the data coming out of Utah compare with the surrounding states from the same time frame? Is it similar species that are being found, or are they completely different taxa?
It's crazy how different the taxa. The ceratopsian story just was knocking us all for a loop when we started realizing, the Cretaceous and Wahweed formation pretty much span the entire Judithian, Old Man through Dinosaur Park up to Horseshoe Canyon. So you look at the evolution of all those horned dinosaurs and things there, and their Ankylosaurs and things. Look at them down in Utah, and they're different lineages. You can see evolution in both areas, but they're mostly separate. There may be a little bit of interchange. And what we've been thinking, this is observations that haven't been published. It's kind of the oil company types that know this. When you look at the thrust belt, pretty much just north of Salt Lake City, as you come into Wyoming, the thrust belt comes right up to the seaway. And, there's times when the sea drops off and you can walk by, but basically there's boulders in marine rocks there. They're just coming right off the mountains into the ocean. And for the dinosaurs migrating from north to south, that tight spot, I think may be the barrier. I used to look at Wyoming, and the tectonics are more complicated in Wyoming than Montana or Utah, and say, oh, it's the tectonics that did it. Probably has nothing to do with anything, but it's probably that width of that floodplain between the mountains and the sea as a big part of it. But also what we're seeing, if Alamosaurus, the sauropod in the Maastrichtian, is actually closer to the Asian stuff, it suggests to me that these things marched along the Pacific Highway and came in, and they couldn't cross the ancestral Brooks Range, which is a multi-mile high mountain range from continental collision. It went right across the North Pole. So if you're going to cross from Asia to the North Slope, you've got to cross a multi-mile high mountain range at the North Pole. We have snow at Kilimanjaro. You have a high mountain range, you get snow on it. It would have been a serious barrier. And that's probably also our Ankylosaurs in the south are much more like the Asian stuff. The euplocephalines are probably an independent group that, there's some stuff in New Mexico that could be related to them, but that went nuts up in Alberta and Montana. But these are all the new stories, the new things I think people are going to start looking at that are really exciting. Our Tyrannosaurs are different in Utah. Our Lambeosaurs, it's crazy how different things are down here. Thinking you're just walking along the beach, it makes no sense. But the whys, we need people, we need geologists working with paleontologists a lot more closely at the western margin of the Seaway. Because I think that's the story, getting around Evanston, Wyoming, and just north of Salt Lake. So Casper, talk with University of Wyoming, get some grad students to go over there. Because the work needs to be done. There's no way I'm doing it. At this point, I'm just trying to finish up my bucket list of papers.
It's funny that you mentioned grad students. We had a question from Zeke about would he ask you about doing a thesis? Or could he ask you about doing a thesis? Zeke is still on this call if you want to unmute and ask your question yourself.
Sure, ask me. I've been talking a lot about someone doing an osteology of Gastonia because there's tons of material. I was just down there looking at the collection and price. There's all this stuff I've never even seen before from that animal. And there's at least 6 individuals in the type locality. I illustrated a handful of stuff. Ken really has only done a handful of things, and there's bunches of animals. Lori McWhinney's got 12 animals. What's going on with this stuff? There's descriptive work that needs to be done, and paleogeographic work and a half. So Zeke,
Yeah, I'm at Northern Arizona.
Oh yeah, that's where I got my master's.
Oh, convenient.
Yeah, Ron Blakey, I owe him a lot.
Good
professor.
But no, so I'm doing geology and bio double major.
Sure.
So there's a lot of opportunities there for me to, hopefully try and get in and do some of that bio
Absolutely
stuff.
is. War terrorist is fun.
And then I feel like as a totally separate thing from dinosaurs, I feel like I remember in a different interview you were saying there's other stuff that's not dinosaur material in the big.
Oh yeah, the Sphenodontids. We got a Toxilophosaur, which is a herbivorous Sphenodonid with a fist about as big as your fist. I mean, skull about as big as your fist. And the whole front half of the forelimbs, pectoral girdle, the whole thing. And, that animal is described from a pair of lower jaws, and that's it. And we've got the whole front end of one of those guys. It's a pretty big animal. And we find lots of jaw fragments. It's a major part of the fauna, no doubt about it. And we never think of them in the early Cretaceous.
Okay.
That's one group, of course, there's turtles and crocs. And
there's a lot of interests I have that it sounds like you're doing a lot of stuff with. So.
As a thesis project, though, if you're going to work on animals, do geology too. Go out and do field work, learn context and how to establish context. But work on stuff that's already in collections. You can't go out to a new formation and start from scratch. You start finding a new dinosaur, it's a decade. If you work hard and visit a lot of museums quick before you're going to get a name on it. That's just the way it is.
Okay.
So if you're going to do a thesis on bones, you want to work on stuff that's already there, like Gastonia. And there's great stuff in collections to be worked on. There's no doubt. Utah's loaded with stuff that's never been described.
So if I do send you an email, would you be able to point me in the right direction to start?
Yeah, the big thing is get into a graduate program that lets you do that kind of stuff in Utah. University of Utah is hard to get into.
Yeah.
They have 100 applicants and take 2 a year.
Yeah. I'm starting with one of the bio labs at NAU now, the evolutionary lab there. So hopefully there I'll at least get some good research background. And because I already have like a family here and stuff, so I don't necessarily want to move if I don't have to, at least for masters. So
Yeah, you could do a master's from Flagstaff. Stikes, you know, you mentioned the Stikes quarry, the Utahraptor mega block. He was a grad student from Flagstaff working with us, you know, doing sedimentology of the poison strip, and he found the first few bones coming out of that site. Yeah, so yeah, you know, you can do theses working up here from Flagstaff. That's not an issue at all. Let's get in a program and get something you can do in a reasonable amount of time. Masters is to show you can conceive of a project and bring it to conclusion. Your PhD, then you can reinvent the wheel. But your masters, you're trying to show you can conceive of a project and bring it to conclusion. That's all you're trying to do. You know, good project. You want to do something good. You know, publishable paper. But you don't want to, get something where it's like, I got to work on this for 10 years to get it done, because that's, I kind of did that and I learned better.
I feel like your mistakes are my learning process then.
Yeah, work on stuff. I mean, there's great stuff available, and do a lot of field work. Come out and join us.
I'm doing a project
for a couple of weeks.
I'm doing an undergraduate research. Sorry. No,
if you get your shots, you can come out and join us for a bit.
Oh no, I got my shots. I'm diabetic. I'm high risk, so I was able to get in there earlier. No, but I'm actually already doing an undergraduate research project this next year.
Good.
So I am getting field work practice and whatnot.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I'll shoot you an email and see what you guys have going on if I can.
Oh yeah, you've heard me say next generation. I say it all the time. There's much more to do. When I was a young student, I found my first dinosaur, which was actually a Jurassic Ankylosaur. It's like, never going to find anything else new in my career. My one dinosaur, and I'm working now to name 26 dinosaurs in my career. There's stuff out there, and there's a lot more to come. No doubt about it.
Okay, then yeah, I will try and send you an email and see what you got going on and see how that works with my schedule too.
James Kirkland at utah.gov. It's easy.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. That's, I think, all of my question then. So anyone else?
Thank you, Jim, for giving this presentation tonight and for answering all of our questions. We really appreciate you coming to the Tate.
Yeah, no, I've been wanting to come to one of your symposia, but Utah doesn't let me across the Red Rock curtain very often.
Well, we appreciate you coming to this.
I was kind of curious. When you showed all the teeth of sauropods, and I was looking at the shape tooth of a Turiasaur, and looking at it, I was kind of wondering if you thought that maybe they had the same feeding habits as Camarasaurus.
Probably somewhat similar, because they had teeth going way back in their jaws, except they have that asymmetric jaw, tooth that hooks to the back. What they call cardiodont, type of sauropod tooth, which the first time I saw one of those teeth in the field in a little bone bed, I was like, wow, I've never seen a tooth like that before. It noticeably did. And I dug up a lot of Camarasaurs, before that. And they're not like Camarasaur teeth, really distinctly different. But there's a lot more to them than, they have Pistocoelous caudal vertebra. So BYU thought the first one, Moabosaurus, originally described it as a titanosaur. But they're not very pneumatic. They're much more primitive than titanosaurs, which have extraordinarily pneumatic vertebra.
I bet, and I guess that kind of makes me assume that like Camarasaurus, which I know from the different shapes of their teeth from like Diplodocus or Patasaurus, which have pen-like teeth that are stripping. I'm guessing that these Turiasaurs and that Moabosaurus sauropod, they were able to chew on tougher green material and were able to maybe chew a little bit before.
Yeah, the wear's a bit different. Camarasaurus has really interesting wear teeth. It just matches over the teeth so well. Where these are more worn, beveled back from the front to the rear on on the back of the tooth more, or medially on the teeth. So they're, they're doing something different than Camarasaurs, but that's a project that if you want to take it on, we need to figure it out. We don't have enough to we're still trying to figure out the plants that lived with them. What was available to eat. We don't have flowering plants at that time, so that's not one of them.
Well,
Parasaurs didn't have them either. No.
well, yeah, I know flowers for sure didn't show up until the Cretaceous.
Yeah, well, later in the Cretaceous, the first stages, there's no flowering plants. Probably, there's probably a few things on the planet, but they don't take over until near the base of the Aptian, in the Birimian, is when they really get your first megafossils, like fruit of the thing from the ponds in Liaoning, China, which is a flowering plant. That's Birimian. But the stuff older, we don't. It's not a single angiosperm pollen grain and that stuff. Carol Houghton is thrilled. She likes Jurassic stuff. So it's like, yeah, none of that pesky angiosperm junk. But as you go up through that, you may start seeing how angiosperms took over in North America. The sites are going to be isolated ponds. Some cases, early cemented paleosols may lock in some pollen before the alkalinity destroys them. There's a lot of lines of work. Keep you busy, come on out.
Well, it's keeping it has been keeping my mind busy. I admit here it's here in the Western, we're kind of low class in fossils. So
where you at?
Virginia.
Virginia, there's stuff in Virginia.
Yes.
Not a
I do
lot
have
of
this Smithsonian.
plastic.
I do have the Smithsonian, and wasn't too long ago the last time I went up there. So that new sauropod
Maryland,
project,
the Arundel Formation.
it kind of gives me an idea of something I want to ask them next time I go up.
Yeah, no, there's work to do on the East Coast. It's just you got to log through the woods to find little creek beds cutting down into things. But there's stuff out there. There's people that found some. Ellisdale was found in. I've been to the site. It's a good East Coast forest, and there's a little draw there and a little creek. Like 4 feet across max. That cuts down into the bone bed, and that's it. And walking down in the water is the only place you reaching down you find bone. It's not on the banks. It's in the water only. So you never know what you're going to see. But yeah, and play with stuff that's not dinosaurs too. Learn all this stuff. I did ammonites and Inoceramid bivalves for my master's and PhD, marine Cretaceous. So I was always doing dinosaur digs. I figured I want to feed a family someday.
Well, I've also kind of always been intrigued by most my marine reptiles and pterosaurs as well.
Sure.
Mesozoic vertebrates have been my passion since I was 5.
Yeah, nope, I was 5. 1959 is when I told people I was going to be a paleontologist. 5 years old.
And you are.
And I made it. That's why I always encourage kids.
Not everybody gets to.
Said that when they were 5 and are doctors now, or physicists, or it's a gateway science. It ruins you for life.
Yeah, not everybody gets to do what they want to do when they're 5. Most people outgrow that sort of stuff, or they kind of, in my case, I kind of went a little to the left and ended up here. But
I tell my wife if I start sounding jaded about it, because I have a pretty good life. You just whack me on the back of the head. Wake up.
That's good. That's good. JP wants to say thank you, but we can't hear him apparently, so he's just gonna wave. Thank you so much. It's past 9 o'clock, so I think we should let you go and get on with your evening.
Yeah, I got grandkids here. I probably should say hi.
Thank you so much. We do appreciate it.
Hey, take care. It's fun.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody.